Hi students, I am Praveen Sebastian Paul. In this lecture we are discussing the UML activity diagram. So this UML activity diagram is also a UML behavioral diagram. In UML, the activity diagram is used to demonstrate the flow of control within the system rather than the implementation. It models the concurrent and sequential activities. The activity diagram helps in envisioning the workflow from one activity to another. It put emphasis on the condition of flow and the order in which it occurs. The flow can be sequential, branched, or concurrent, and to deal with such kind of flows, the activity diagram has come up with a fork, join, etc. It is also termed as an object-oriented flowchart. It encompasses activities composed of a set of actions or operations that are applied to model the behavioral diagrams. So next we are dealing with the components associated with the activity diagram. So an activity diagram composed of the following components. First of all, we are dealing with the term activities. The categorization of behavior into one or more actions is termed as an activity. In other words, it can be said that an activity is a network of nodes that are connected by edges. The edges depict the flow of execution. It may contain action nodes, control nodes, or object nodes. The control flow of an activity is represented by control nodes and the object nodes that illustrate the object used within an activity. The activities are initiated at the initial node and terminated at the final node. So next term is the activity partition or swim lanes. The swim lane is used to cluster all the related activities in one column or one row. It can be either vertical or horizontal. It is used to add modularity to the activity diagram. It is not necessary to incorporate swim line in the activity diagram, but it is used to add more transparency to the activity diagrams. So next term is a fork. The fork and join node generate concurrent flow inside the activity. A fork node consists of one inward edge and several outward edges. It is the same as that of various decision parameters. Whenever a data is received at an inward edge, it gets copied and split crossways across outward edges. It splits a single inward flow into multiple parallel flows. So the next one is the join nodes. The join node are the opposite of the fork node. A logical AND operation is performed in all of the inward edges as it synchronizes the flow of input across one single output or outward edge. So next term is the pins. It is a small rectangle which are attached to the action rectangle. It clears out all the messy and complicated thing to manage the execution flow of activities. It is an object node that precisely represents one input to or output from the action. So my dear students, next we are dealing the notations for activity diagram. So my dear students, the activity diagram constitutes 4 different notations. First one is the initial state. It depicts the initial state or beginning of the set of action. Second one is the final state. That is, it is a stage where all the control flow and object flow ends. Third one is the decision box. It makes sure that the control flow or object flow will flow only in one path. And fourth one is action box, which represents the set of actions that are to be performed. So my dear students, next arises a question why we should use an activity diagram. An event is created as an activity diagram encompassing of group of nodes associated with edges. To model the behavior of activities, they can be attached to any modeling element. It can model use cases, classes, interfaces, components, and collaborations. It mainly models processes and workflows, and the activity diagram envisions the dynamic behavior of the system as well as construct a runnable system that incorporate forward and reverse engineering. It does not include the message part, which means message flow is not represented in an activity diagram. So there arises a question how to draw an activity diagram. An activity diagram is a flowchart of activities as it represents the workflow among various activities. They are identical to the flowcharts, but they themselves are not exactly the flowchart. In other words, it can be said that an activity diagram is an enhancement of the flowchart which encompasses several unique skills. Since it incorporates swim lanes, branching, parallel flow, join node, control nodes, and forks, it supports exception handling. A system must be explored as a whole before drawing an activity diagram to provide a clearer view of the user. All the activities are explored after they are properly analyzed for finding out constraints applied to the activities. Each and every activity condition and association must be recognized. So following are the rules that are to be followed for drawing an activity diagram. First one is a meaningful name should be given to each and every activity. Secondly, identify all the constraints, and thirdly, acknowledge the activity associations. So my dear students, next we are discussing when to use an activity diagram. An activity diagram can be used to portray business processes and workflows. Also, it is used for modeling business as well as the software. An activity diagram is utilized for the following. It is used to graphically model the workflow in an easier and understandable way. Secondly, to model the execution flow among several activities. Thirdly, to model comprehensive information of functions or an algorithm employed within the system. Fourth one is to model the business process and its workflow. Fifth one is to envision the dynamic aspect of the system. Sixth one is to generate the top level flowchart to represent the workflow of an application. And seventhly, to represent a high level view of distributed or an object oriented system. So my dear students, in this lecture we had discussed the UML activity diagram. So dear students, the activity diagram is used to demonstrate the flow of control within the system rather than the implementation, and it models the concurrent and sequential activities. So my dear students, hope you had understood this topic. So my dear students, kindly go through this assignment question. Our question is, write notes on UML activity diagram. So dear students, in the upcoming lecture we will discuss an example relating the activity diagram. So my dear students, see you soon. Until then, goodbye, thank you, and all the best.